Well, hello and welcome to No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen in the final days of this campaign. Of course, it's a busy week as Daryl Bricker predicted a bit earlier in the week for us. It's going to get messy. This is where everybody throws every bit of mud they've got going as they try to change voters' minds at the last moment. So not surprising that we have got a lot of those issues to go through today, and we're going to do it with our favorite pod panel, Margaret McCuaig-Johnston, Tasha Kheiriddin, and Mark Norman. I've been working you overtime during this campaign. Welcome to you all. Okay, let's start with today's crisis du jour here. Did Mark Carney tell us the truth about his conversation with Donald Trump when he said that the president was going to respect Canadian sovereignty? And now we have reportage that, in fact, in the end of the exchange, it was Mark Carney who said, okay, we'll agree to disagree. It is important that we get the data that we need from people running for office. But I'll just do a once around here. Tasha, why don't you go first here? Much ado about nothing or serious?
Well, it's not nothing. The image or the impression we had from the call and the way Mr. Carney reported it was that there was, a recognition of Canadian sovereignty. I think those were his words, actually,
Yeah.
or respect for Canadian sovereignty.
Canada's sovereignty. Yeah.
Correct. And he didn't mention that 51st state came up, and 51st state talk is not really respectful of Canadian sovereignty. The PMO also denied that he said we agree to disagree. That was in the Radio Canada report, though. I read that there. So, I don't know where the truth lies. But clearly, if that was raised by Mr. Trump, it gives a different, it's a different impression than we got from Mr. Carney, which was that probably this didn't come up because, well, it wouldn't be respectful of our sovereignty. So was he trying to look like the man of the hour? Was he did he misrepresent it deliberately to try and look like he's a good crisis manager? That's what the Bloc is saying. I would like the question to be asked of him. Why did you give this version of events? And I don't know if that question's been asked at this
Well, it was
point.
asked this morning in a press conference, but not a clear answer. It's I told him and then he told me, and then we only have that version of events.
Right.
Mark, I guess as we've heard throughout the campaign, every time Mark Carney gets to pause his campaign and be prime minister, it helps him. Every time 51st state and Canadian sovereignty is in the news, it helps him because that's what he's based his campaign on. So do you think the timing of this is interesting or an issue?
Well, I'm always somewhat skeptical when it comes to the timing of how these pieces of information go into play in circulation. I think to pick up on one of Tasha's comments that, one of the frustrations with all of this, and this incident, if we can call it that, is the latest example, is it is so hard to decipher fact from fiction. And with everything else going on, it just points to the fact that how does the average Canadian, and I say that in a respectful, non-pejorative way, wade through all of the stuff that's out there to formulate any kind of reliable assessment as to what they can believe or not believe. And as you said in your opening comment, we're now into the sprint, if you will, or the near sprint, the final lap of the
final lap for sure
of the campaign here, and things are going to get they're going to get spicy. And I don't, if I don't know what to believe, I perhaps I'm a little slow and I don't read the right stuff, but it just speaks to the challenge of getting a credible, reliable message that people can believe. And to your specific question around, does it help or not help? Well, if the issue here is who is going to best manage our relationship with the United States, if that is a ballot question.
Yeah.
And I think we all have some agreement that that is on the ballot. Then anything related to that needs to be completely, honestly disclosed. And I don't know what to interpret from it. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I asked specifically because you wrote very early on a piece that was talking about Canada's relationship with the U.S. You were very pessimistic. You said, like, look, it can't be saved. So that's kind of why I'm looking to see whether you've changed a little bit in the course.
Well,
of
I was being intentionally provocative, as I tend to be sometimes. But I think and by the way, as we all know, if you're invited to do these things, you never get to write the headline unless you specifically insist on it. And so, it was a bit stark, and I stand by that. Well, I think, the relationship has fundamentally changed, and we can't deny that. And so the question is, how do we want to reset the different layers and dimensions of that relationship going forward? And if Canadians are being asked who's the best person to do that, then they need to base that assessment on accurate, reliable reporting of information. And that the media shouldn't have to be running around scratching on things to find out whether everybody was told the truth or not.
Well, and also it raises the whole question of the media prism through which we are hearing a lot of this stuff, because we haven't exactly
and there's the
had
bias. As soon as Team X alleges one thing, then the supporters of Team Y will come out and say, well, that's biased because it's all Team X. Look, I find this increasingly frustrating, challenging, and to be honest, it's bordering on frightening in some respects. If we can't even have a credible account of what was probably no more than a 5-minute conversation.
Yes. I agree. Okay, Margaret, I'm going to go to you, and I want to go to something else that's frightening, but if you've got 2 cents on that, absolutely throw it in. But you're our China expert here, and to see the developments in the last few days of a Chinese diplomat saying he wants to do, cozy up to Canada because we need to take on that big bad American bully together. And also the Chinese interference, which still persists to the point we have one candidate almost suspending his campaign.
Right. And so just to double back on the question about Carney and Trump, because I think it's an important one.
Yeah.
You may remember when Carney weeks ago first reported on this call, he did say, he started to say, he was respectful of Canadian sovereignty and further, and then he said, well, I could say more, but I think and I think he's trying to weigh what the implications are of every little thing. He doesn't have the political instincts yet at all, clearly. But I think he did give the right answer to Trump, which is, we'll have to agree to disagree. He set it aside. And then, from there, it seems that, Trump wasn't going to get himself into the middle of the election campaign. We'll wait until after the election for any negotiations to start. So I think he did give the right answer, but that's a big admission that misled Canadians, and that's
this is no time for rookies in the game, because Carney also makes a point about his experience on the world stage versus Poilievre's, but this kind of response. Anyway, Tasha, jump in on that issue just briefly, and then we'll go back to Margaret on China.
Yeah, I think that you've got the issue of the 51st state has helped Mr. Carney, no question. Every time sovereignty issues come up, the Liberals get a bounce. So the question is then, why didn't he raise it in the context of his call? And I think because it was a different context, and because he wanted to look like he was the guy that Trump would respect, which is his calling card, which is what he's saying in the election. I'm the guy to handle Trump.
Yeah.
So if Trump is rattling on about the 51st state, it's great that Carney shut him down. I agree. And if that's what he said, I think that was the right response. We'll agree to disagree. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. Let's put this in a box over there. Let's talk about trade over here. But the fact he didn't say it, I do wonder also if there was a confidentiality issue as well. If he's thinking, well, if I start, telling everyone what we said, is that
then
the right
Trump
thing?
will
Again,
start giving his
yes, well, going to the political instincts. And we know Trump goes back and forth anytime anyone says anything about him, right? And Trump had said, Trump was respectful in his characterization of the call. What he tweeted out was, had a good call, or what it was with the prime minister, not the governor. So I think that Carney, Carney characterized it the way he did because it advantaged him. But also, to Margaret's point, I don't think he's quite got the political savvy yet. But his team should have advised him on this. So I wonder what their thought was here, and if he listened to them or not. So there's a whole basket of stuff. But it gave us the impression that he was probably in Trump's better graces than Polyev, which maybe isn't true.
Yeah. All right, Margaret, let's do China, because this is an issue that for some reason has not captured public attention or interest when it is it's interference with our democratic process. Sometimes I'm so puzzled.
China is continuing with this electoral interference. We had a whole commission on this, and we still haven't fixed it. And so we get them encouraging us to side with China and against the big bully, the United States. I don't think that's going to happen. I think, everybody's got a beat on China and understands where China's coming from, just to take advantage of these rifts. But they're not doing it just with us. They're doing it with every other country in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, we have to think about it in that context. They're also taking advantage of the cutbacks in the State Department's role. And there are major cuts coming to State Department. All the soft power is being done away with. USAID, all of that is gone. And China is stepping into the void. Huge mistake on the part of the US. So there's that dimension. You mentioned the candidate in Toronto. This is Joe Tai, who's running as a conservative. And
this is the controversial riding, just to remind everybody, where the Liberal candidate had suggested that Mr. Tai should be sent to Hong Kong for retraining, if I can put it in its most polite terms. And Mr. Carney never asked him to step aside. He eventually quit. Then they put another candidate in who is almost as vociferous. So here's Mr. Tai. What do you make of it all?
Well, I think what he's getting a lot of grief at the doors. And so what they've done is they've pulled back their in-person canvassing, not just for him, but his whole team, for their own safety. And this comes on the heels of information from CSIS that there are credible threats against him. This is a candidate who is a human rights activist, an activist for democracy for Hong Kong. And he has been subject to 1 million Hong Kong dollars, which is about $170,000, bounty on his head for anyone who can capture him, take him to a consulate or the embassy so he can be transferred to China to stand trial for his pro-democracy advocacy. The man deserves a lot of credit for having the courage to put his name forward in the election. And the Canadian electoral system should be giving him full cooperation to ensure his safety. What we're seeing is that on WeChat, some other platforms as well, Chinese platforms, when you put his name in on WeChat, it brings up information about the bounty, and he's a criminal convict on the run, essentially.
My God.
This is how he's being portrayed to the Chinese Canadian community, which is a big community in that riding. So there's only a week left. less than a week left.
Less than a week, yeah.
And so I'm hoping that he can, he's made a big enough impact already that he will be well understood as a viable and legitimate candidate that people should look seriously at supporting, rather than how he's being portrayed by the Chinese government. This is all coming from Beijing.
I mean, Mark, this is the country that took the two Michaels, that has killed Canadians on Chinese soil, that has threatened the relationship. It's just like, and it's raises its head in this campaign again because of in some cases Carney's connection with this on larger global issues through the Davos process or whatever. You bring the military perspective. We know what they're doing in the North. How are we supposed to respond to this? Should somebody be standing up this minute and saying, no, we're not going to be doing any deal with you to fight any bully, whether it's Donald Trump or not? Do we ignore it? What do you think?
Yeah, well, this is another amazing example of the incremental adjustment of our tolerance levels of issues which should otherwise be absolutely we should consider them atrocious and over the line, so to speak. And there's a domestic component to this. There's a broader Canadian security component to this, and there's an international component. And Margaret's touched on all of those. And I just, from a domestic perspective, where is the line? Like, if this is not foreign interference, then what is? And I don't understand how the machinery who are trying to stay out of it because nobody wants to interfere and kind of let things. We have this naive belief that if we sort of let things play out, eventually they will find whatever their natural equilibrium is. Well, that it is naive and it's irresponsible. Yeah. And I go back to my comment about the incremental adjustment of whatever our tolerance levels are. That this is absolutely unacceptable behavior. So to the question, how do we react? Well, I'm not exactly sure. And from a more broader security perspective, the issue around the threat of China or the threat from China is real. They are on a path. They don't deny it. And the commentary that you started with and that Margaret responded to with respect to, hey, Canada, look, man, we feel your pain. How about we band together here and stand up?
Let's team up. Yeah.
This is absolute, perfectly scripted psychological operations. This is what it is, and this is what they do. Meanwhile, I mean, what flabbergasts me in this whole thing is, I think the Americans actually think they're being smarter than they really are. They're getting outplayed literally every time they get the puck. And they don't realize it. They're like, hey, look at us. We're really good. We're really smart. We're standing up. They're getting their backsides.
And we're going to do a deal with China.
Well, exactly. It's just, anyway, so I don't know how helpful that is. But I see this through a couple of different layers, and I'm sure Margaret has more to add.
I'm going to come back to Margaret. First, I have to say, okay, we put Prime Minister Justin Trudeau put tariffs on Chinese EVs, and they put 100% tariffs on Canadian canola, which is my part of the world. So I rant about that as many other things. So a quick word to Tasha, and then we'll let you wrap up, Margaret, on the China issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what shocked me when I did see the reports about the interference in the riding, and specifically on the WeChat and the disinformation stuff that was being pumped out, and the conclusion was that it was not affecting the race. And that's what I was like, how could it not affect the race?
I mean,
honestly, that to me was a shocking statement about the situation. If anything, that race should be suspended. That race should not happen.
But we heard that throughout the whole piece, Margaret. We heard that about the interference in BC. Everybody said, oh, yes, but it didn't affect the outcome of the election. how could we possibly know it didn't affect the outcome of the election?
Well, in fact, it did, because at
Yeah.
least one MP
Right.
lost their seat, and
Right,
the
right.
Commissioner Hug recognized that, and there were perhaps more. What she didn't recommend, which I think they should be doing, is they've got to get the information back to the people who are seeing this disinformation.
Yeah,
And in Taiwan, they have a website. Of course, it's in Chinese, so it's accessible to those who see WeChat. It corrects disinformation, and the Canadian government would be in a position to put in place something like this so that it can neutralize what harm has been done. Otherwise, they're basically leaving it up to the candidate himself to kind of fend it off, and that's very difficult for him to do.
and not fair.
I don't think, to be honest, I think that's a good idea, but I think it's, even if it does fend it off, they do fend it off with such a website, the damage is more that the voters believe Beijing has a preferred candidate. No matter what the truth is, doesn't matter. It's a fear factor that's instilled in those folks who say, okay, we're going to vote this way. They may not believe what Beijing is saying, but simply the fact that the stuff is being
they just
said.
don't want to be seen at the voting booth.
Exactly. So that's what the real issue is. So you can counter propagandize it all you want. I don't think that's even going to make a difference in the voters' minds as much. I think it's really more that you have to stop it from happening, and or people like Carney have to call it out. Like, if it's happening on behalf of his candidate, essentially, he's not the author of it, but he needs to make more of a statement. And he has made some statements on China, but the scuttlebutt is, oh, well, Beijing's fine with that because they think after it's all over, he'll be nice to them anyway. I've read that. So who knows what to believe anywhere. But he's still, that might make more of a difference than having a website say this is just disinformation.
This goes back to the previous issue. What can we believe or not?
Yeah.
And this is why all of these issues are increasingly disturbing, because they are material to not just the circumstance we find ourselves in politically with respect to the election and candidates and everything else, but they are material to the geostrategic situation that we have we've been thrust into. Perhaps naively, but nonetheless, we are where we are, and we're not behaving seriously.
Like a grown-up.
I think we're vulnerable as a result of that.
No, I think you've raised a really profound issue because, and it's particularly stark in election campaigns, but we see it in general. There's so much, we're awash in so much information and facts. Like, if you sit down and spend 2 hours on X or on whatever you want, like, you're just going, oh my God, the world
Don't
is
do
not
that.
going to hell in a handbasket. It's already there. And so then you either kind of turn a blind eye and say, I can't cope. And this, I'm spending 4 or 5 hours a day. I think I mentioned this the last time, just listening to podcasts, just reading, let's go into other sources, people who have the job at the auto plant that might be shutting down, they don't have 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day to go and inform themselves. And we're counting on the media and we're counting on the leaders to be sharp and short on this. And neither is really
right. So your 5 hours a day translates into one vote. Yeah,
exactly.
The 5 minutes, perhaps glancing that somebody at best might be able to afford to dedicate to some of these issues gets a vote. And that's not a condemnation of the system. It's a condemnation of how the entire process is being hijacked on multiple levels. And that's why this is disturbing. And it's fine for learned individuals. You mentioned Bricker at the beginning, and he's definitely a learned individual to comment, this is where things get nasty or spicy. And again, we accept that. Our tolerance of that is, okay, it's kind of like, that's normal, that's the way it is. Meanwhile, the degree to which things are happening is well beyond reasonable. And there's huge risks in all of this, not
Yeah.
not to be too negative about it, right?
Tasha, go ahead on this.
Yeah, I mean, there are huge risks. I think that it is right now we are in this ocean of disinformation. I'm not sure how the average person, I think, is more susceptible to the stuff they see from people they trust. So whether it is a media they trust,
Yeah.
or it is their, people who are still on Facebook, their neighbor, their friend, their relative, like that's become the litmus test of accepting something is true. Is it, do you trust the source? And people are distrusting a lot of traditional sources. So you have lots of sources that have no fact checking or that have agendas that are, completely partisan one way or the other. And I'm not saying partisan could be for a foreign government, for whatever. They're being trusted. That's the problem. It used to be, you remember, Pamela, you were an anchor. People would trust you, right? You were the face of the news.
That was supposed to be the point. Yeah.
Exactly. I remember like Lloyd Robertson too, he's like trustworthy, like all you guys were trustworthy. So we trusted you that what we were hearing was true. Well, now people trust, a random person, YouTuber from nowhere who's never been to J school, doesn't know what responsible journalism is, and maybe paid by Russia. God help us. I don't know the way out of this mess, but we're in one for sure.
Because we've lost that editorial function everywhere, not just in the news industry, but that second pair of eyes and ears to take a look at an issue and say, like it actually, I'll go right into it because this week it's another one of those things, this report from the Privy Council office where they have looked into the future and it is bleak. And particularly for the younger generation, and home ownership will be a luxury, education will be a luxury, eating will be a luxury. People will have to be out foraging for food on government lands. This is a government document from the most important government department in the system, the PCO, or it's the Prime Minister's office, right? It's his department, Privy Council office. Margaret, you spent a lot of time inside the system. Do we take this seriously or not?
I must say I'm completely shocked by the document. Yes, PCO does strategic thinking.
Yeah.
But it's, around public policy issues, it's not mapping out the dimensions of the apocalypse.
Yeah.
And so it's very concerning. And worse than that, the timing of this coming out now in the election.
Yeah.
It's really shocking. I think we'll all have to, if we can get a copy, have a read of it.
It's easy to get. You can go on the PCO website. It's there. Yeah.
So, how do they get to that apocalyptic vision? What public policy missteps were taken in getting there? And then working back from there, how do we avoid those?
I think that's exactly how others have used the document, which is, this is, what the last 10 years have brought us, et cetera. We've heard this on the campaign already, right? Policies that have made housing too unaffordable, et cetera, et cetera. So, but you're right. Why this approach? Mark, out of the military, I'm sure you must do worst case scenarios and best case scenarios looking forward. What happens if the Russians invade? What happens if the Americans invade, et cetera?
Yeah, so to Margaret's point, so I haven't seen the report. I've only seen the reporting.
The reports of the reports, yeah.
But, this so I'm not going to talk about the specifics of it, but I want to talk about some of the implications. So, this kind of thing to me is entirely within the reasonable limits of what you would expect responsible government agencies to do. Now, that might shock a lot of people. I would hope it doesn't shock your viewers or listeners, but it may shock other people that, sometimes you have to have really, really uncomfortable conversations in order to ensure that the different mechanisms within the machinery of government are prepared for scenarios that you don't want to talk about around your kitchen table. So, that so let's just park that, and let's
Yeah.
assume for the moment that this was all done in the context of what I would call prudent planning. And yes, the military does this kind of thing regularly, probably not often enough because it takes a lot of time and energy, and there's a lot of other things to deal with. But nonetheless, then the issue is, okay, why does he get released? You know, week 7 or whatever the hell we are in,
Yes.
in election.
5.
In the final
Week
days,
5,
yes,
right?
in the final
Thank
days.
you for
Feels like 7. Feels like 20. I don't know.
But yeah, exactly. So the point is, why now? And Margaret said that, and
Yeah.
it is hard. I look, I try not to be a cynical person, but it's hard not to be a little cynical when you see these things, because it's only one of two scenarios. It's either nobody was thinking about it and it was on a timeline and it just came out and it just popped out, and everybody thought nothing of it,
Right.
Which speaks to issues around judgment and competence with respect to the management of these types of reports in the first place, or somebody thought that it was timely to put this out. And of course, then this plays right into this whole issue of, okay, what were the assumptions? How was the report put together? Who were and all those things are available, and they can be scrutinized.
And they're obliged by law actually to release them because it's public funds and it's Government of Canada documents, and so you can't not release them either, right?
Right. And you need to be, I'm sure the thing's been peer reviewed and everything else, but the point is, to what end? Other than internal prudent planning, I get all that. Releasability to me is not an issue. The issue is now the reaction. And both sides of the political debate at the moment can play this to their advantage.
Yeah.
One side can argue, oh yeah, here, look, if we stay on this path, we're on a road to ruin, and that plays right into the conservative narrative, and legitimately in some ways. Equally, there's a legitimate argument that says, whoa, there's lots of unknowns, and there's a lot of variables out there, and what you really need is a steady hand on the tiller, and we've got just the guy to be the guy. But so, like, anyway.
I agree. It can go either way, and that's only in the voters' minds somehow, whether they even.
And how many of them actually care about a PCO report that talks about what life is going to be like?
I think it's so apocalyptic. People foraging off the land. It's just short of eating bugs, which is, of course, the famous trope that people on the far right will say that the World Economic Forum wants you to eat bugs, right? So this is one
Kill
step
all
away
the cows,
from that.
They make too much methane.
Yeah. So I don't think things are accidents. I remember the 2005 election when all of a sudden there was an RCMP investigation into Ralph Goodale. It just happened during the actual campaign. What was that, right? Things happen, and I think here. I'm trying to think who this advantages more. But I think Mark's right. You can play it both ways.
Yeah, you can play it.
But considering it was a report done by the previous government, how does such a thing get put out there? It's not a leak, but how does it, what makes that decision? Well, somebody who's probably, I would say, liberal friendly. how else could it be? Because it was a liberal government. So are they thinking that this shows, Mark Carney's the guy to handle this kind of DEFCON 5 crisis? And I think for a lot of people, fear, like the liberal motivation is fear, right? The liberal motivation is not hope. The conservatives are the ones running on hope. We'll give you a house. We'll get you a better job. A safe street with soldiers standing there with a flag. If I hear that one more time, anyway. But that's the picture they paint, as opposed to apocalypse now. So the liberals are campaigning on fear. So if you're a boomer, you look at this and go, okay, maybe I'm not going to be here, but my kids, oh my God. And if you're a young person, you're looking at this, or anyone, but mostly the older cohort, going, this is terrible. So it's a motivator, right, for their side. And I just, I think the whole thing just speaks to irresponsibility, right, of using such a thing when you know how inflammatory this can be for people.
Yeah, go ahead, Margaret.
Just very quickly, I would step into this and say that in my experience in 37 years in government, when things happen in the public like this that look so unexplainable, it's usually not tactical, it's incompetence. And I say that now in defense of the bureaucracy, that they would not have contrived to have done this. That's my instinct from having seen things go south a few times, that it's usually somebody makes a really bad judgment, or the yellow stickies that were supposed to be on the page when the thing was put through the copier all got pulled off as they went through the copier, and that revealed Bombardier's whole plan from there. Anyway, it's stupid things like that happen.
Yeah, no,
Maybe
you're quite right. It that happens a lot, and the whole competence question. Do you have the competence to launch a vast right-wing or left-wing conspiracy?
But the other issue, it goes back to a conversation we had a couple of discussions ago, and I don't remember specifically when, but it was characterized, I think it was Tasha who talked about kind of the upside down election.
Yeah.
And how this, so how we got here is interesting, maybe. To me, the much bigger issue is to what extent does this potentially, whether anybody reads the report or not, it's just the characterization of all of the challenges that we are facing as a nation.
Yeah, okay? It does kind of touch on it all. And, you know, for me, it raised this issue because it was just Pierre Poilievre in the last day or two talking about EVs and warning people, quote unquote, that if the Liberals come back, you know, that Mark Carney has dedicated the last X years of his life to the climate agenda, to, you know, all of those liberal threats that you're going to be forced to drive an EV, and even though they don't work in Saskatchewan and where it's cold, or what kind of appliances you're going to have, and no more plastic bags and no more plastic straws, and all of. For that being Mark Carney's defining a 500-page book on these issues, I'm surprised that the climate hasn't played a larger role, Tasha, in this campaign.
And nobody cares. I hate to say it. I mean, it's not even a top 5. All the polling is on issues. It does not even crack the top 5. It's in the single digits, and it's low because people are concerned about pocketbook issues, and they're concerned about Trump. And pocketbook is a variety, like, you know, people separate out housing versus economy versus, you know, employment, inflation, cost of living. Like, those are all the issues. And so, I mean, you can't find a majority of Canadians who would spend $100 of their own money to improve the climate. We've done studies, like there's been polling on that for years, and they're very small minority of people. So people are not, if something costs them money in this day and age, they don't want it. And the climate right now is not the existential issue. So for Poilievre to go around, you know, and try, and I saw that with Carney and the EVs and stuff, and you won't be able to buy a car, and this kind of he's trying to raise climate in a negative way. But Carney has not made climate a banner issue. He's talked about it, but he's not putting it front and center either, because he knows it's not the issue. Yeah.
The policies will be another issue after the other day.
But how does Canada become an energy superpower, if I heard the quote correctly?
Yes, without any pipelines?
who's not the first person to use that quote, by the way, but that's beside the point. The most recent use of that reference. How does that happen without exploiting our fossil fuel reserve?
It doesn't.
Right.
Exactly.
So I think, you know, Tasha's a really good point here with respect to have we reached the tipping point where practicality in many respects is starting to trump ideology? I use the word Trump as a verb.
Yes, I understand.
You know, and if so, okay, good. Because then we're having the right kinds of conversations. Because, you know, appealing to those things at the top of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is nice. But when people are fighting it out on a day-to-day basis to deal with the stuff at the bottom of that triangle, all that ideological stuff is perhaps interesting, but it's not their problem. And so, you know, this fascinates me because there are so many layers of, at one end, I'll call it hypocrisy. And at another end, I'll just simply say curious disconnects. Or you just, how do you connect all these dots? And so again, I go back to, you know, look, I advanced voted. So, okay. But, there's a lot of people who have to make a very important decision. And I would like to believe they're going to take it very seriously. But my God, it's just, like, how do you wade through all the crap, to put it?
Well, I'll go to Margaret on that as we begin to ask the last few final questions here. Margaret, how do people decide as they're sitting there? Because we're told by the pollsters that at least a quarter of the population makes up their mind in the last 72 hours of a campaign. And at the end of the week, everybody will, the Pope's funeral will be filling up the screens and all the rest of it. So how do people, is it just their gut because of this sea of information? How are they going to decide what the ballot question is when they walk into the booth?
Well, it's an interesting question in the context of what the platforms are, because there have been a number of commentators who have pointed out that there are so many parallels, and essentially Carney strategically took a lot of Poilievre's policies and made them his own. So there really aren't big differentiations between the two parties. So then you look at the leader, and I think that's where people are going to say, do we want this kind of leader or that kind of leader? I think one of the factors will be international leadership in the context of Trump. And we've seen Carney with international leaders all over the world, including Xi Jinping, which doesn't make me feel too comfortable, but he's at those tables. Poilievre's been an MP for 21 years, and he doesn't even travel much internationally. He's been to Southeast Asia and Taiwan on parliamentary trips. Nothing beyond that I've seen, and I've been watching carefully because I thought this was odd for someone who was aspiring, even before he became leader, was aspiring to leadership and to the prime minister's job. I don't remember any photo of him with another leader.
That you would travel. Interesting point. That's a very interesting point.
Yeah.
Tasha?
I was going to say that's Trump's modus operandi as well. Trump doesn't like to travel. He's never been, it's more like come to me in his case for people. But I think that the question here is in terms of leadership. I agree it's going to come down to a leader, but I think it's two sets of voters looking for a very different kind of leader. They are very diametrically opposed. The people who like Poilievre don't like Carney because they don't trust international institutions. They don't trust, the World Economic Forum, and they don't trust the WHO.
The UN
So if you're close to those, if you can call Macron, you've got his speed dial. They don't think that's a good thing. So those people, Carney will never convince those. But the conservative base, the real base, is very solid because they are very skeptical about everything he is, elitist, globalist, all that stuff. So it's actually for him, it's a negative for them with regard to him. But Carney appeals to a broader swath of voters, as the polls tell us, who do think, the anti-Trumps, right? People who do think Canada should be engaged on the world stage. The US should be too. What's happening to them? We need to be able to have other dance partners. So in that sense, Carney to them is a plus. So I think this is one of the most polarizing elections because, to me, the leaders are so polarized, and what they represent, their backgrounds, everything is so polarly opposite to each other. And that's why after this election, whoever gets in, it's going to be a lot of dissatisfied people. I think the mood in the country will be very grumbly.
And I want to come to that, but to Mark's point, to follow up on that, like if we want to do business with other people and because of our changing relationship with the US, or the US's changing relationship with the rest of the world, if we don't have things to trade or sell to other people because we can't get it to our shores to get it to others, it really compromises our ability to have some kind of counter relationship that somehow we're going to take that third option and now just do business with Europe. I mean, you can't do that kind of switch. There's the connections with the US just account for way too much on the plate. Mark, a quick word, and then to Margaret.
Yeah, so there's a lot there, and I know we're pressed for time. So look, at the risk of oversimplifying this, Well, one of the things we're struggling with here is the distinction between what I would characterize in my own experience between down and in and up and out. And those priorities evolve and shift over time based on circumstance. There's no denying the fact that we're at a point right now where, irrespective of what we would like to see happen, the reality is that we have so many issues that are down and in issues right now. Yeah. That yes, some of them are affected by what's going on outside our borders. There's no denying that. But the reality is we got to get our own house in order here.
Right.
And I think that is part of this. And I think that's why we're seeing the polarization that Tasha's describing. We will see what happens. I don't think a lot of Canadians who are dealing with the kinds of challenges they're trying to manage on a day-to-day basis are really too concerned about the world around us. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be engaged and that we shouldn't have proper, sound policy, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But at the end of the day, what's affecting the average Canadian is in the context I described, it's a lot of down and in stuff. And so that's where you got to get your hands dirty and you roll up your sleeves. And, none of this is pretty. This is not academic theoretical stuff. Like This is just down and dirty, nasty, sort out the basement, get the plumbing working, all that kind of analogy, if I can put it that way.
Pay our defense bills. Let's start there.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's part of it. And, I think Margaret
no, but it is, I think people are focused on housing and food and whether or not their kids are actually going to have a better life than they had, which is the American dream and the Canadian dream. And I'm pretty sure the parental dream, Margaret. I mean, it's not just unique to any party. It's, what's the future look like? I don't mean the Privy Council kind of future. I mean, tomorrow.
Yeah. And, this is where I'm a little disappointed that both parties got out there with big tax breaks, 40 billion for the Liberals, 75 billion for the Conservatives, before we know what we're facing on the tariffs.
Right.
We know it's going to be targeted. It's going to be autos, forestry. I would count canola in there. Yeah. That's a different kind of thing, but
not the Americans, but still,
Yeah, exactly. And so we need to be there with support for those families and for the families of the sectors that are related to those sectors that support, the restaurants around the factories of the auto workers that are now shut, some interim support so these people don't all lose their houses. We could have millions of people without work.
But we kind of have to, that's again, I mean, you don't really want to put that in an election platform because we don't know.
We don't know, but we know something's coming. I mean, Trump is promising it to us. Hopefully it won't be the 10% or 40% tariff across the board. It'll be more like targeted to each sectors, and he's identified some sectors. But we have to have funds available for that. And we haven't booked anything. We've got these.
And if we shut down oil and gas, we're certainly not going to have funds available. To your point, Mark, right? Like that's kind of.
Carney's talked about. He is committed to transportation infrastructure. I would count pipelines as part of that. You've got to have it. We've got to be able to send it there instead of south.
Yeah. Okay, Tash, I'm going to throw this one at you. And we've heard it. Throughout the campaign. In fact, we hear it even when there's not a campaign on. And having grown up in this part of the world, I'll just say it. The election is over when the ballots are counted in downtown Toronto, and what happens east of the Ontario border doesn't matter. Preston Manning has caused quite a stir in the campaign by saying, you better be thinking about this. Because if we have another result like this, particularly because it looked for so long like a conservative win, that this is going to create some very real divisions. Then I hear people living in central Canada say, I'm tired of the Western whiners. This is not a good place to begin a discussion, which we're going to have to start on Monday.
No,
Tuesday morning.
Yeah, it's not a good place. And there's been polling done that shows I think it's 1 in 3 Canadians think that we should take Western separation seriously as a threat. Higher in the West, that number, but overall, it was a Leger poll that I saw this week. And that is alarming because usually you think of separation threats as coming from Quebec, right? It's always been about that. So what alarms me is the following scenario. If you had a minority Liberal government, which has a bloc balance of power, right? The bloc holds a balance of power to keep a minority Liberal government in place. What does that imply going forward when you're going to be in negotiations with Trump and you're going to be dealing with all these issues, tariffs and whatnot? It implies that Quebec's going to get an outsized seat at the table. The West is going to scream up and down. And you're going to have a more serious unity crisis than we have seen in this country in a long time. And Danielle Smith and her crowd will take advantage of this. I do think that there is an agenda out there because they have the U.S. as a potential dance partner in this that makes it worse than before. And the people see advantage. They see that maybe it would be better on the other side of the fence. So that threat will be there. If you have a majority Liberal government, which has some representation from the West, because if they are majority, they likely will be getting a few seats. They're talking in Edmonton, maybe even Calgary, a seat. So then it's harder to say there's no Western voices. And Carney will have to give space to those Western voices. He would have to make an effort to really make sure people are represented. If the Conservatives win, no one's giving them more than a minority, and most people aren't giving them a win at all.
Not even that,
But if they have a government, then it's obviously the Western whiners cannot whine because they'll be in, right? So,
but some of the darker scenarios on this, I was just reading something last night that, if the majority or even a hefty minority on the Liberal side comes to pass, then there's no disincentive if he doesn't have any seats. If Mr. Carney doesn't have any seats in the West, just put an export tax on the oil sector, raise the revenues that way, and use the money to fund all those programs that Margaret was talking about. Like, this could be.
If he did that, then you would fuel Western separation like you would not.
For sure.
I mean, that's clear. And he knows, I don't think he would do that because he knows that Danielle Smith's already said that she would raise the barricades.
Yeah, that would go.
So I don't think that would.
A thought on this?
Yeah, I think his challenge in the coming months will be dealing with Danielle Smith as opposed to Trump. Trump would be easier in some ways because you kind of know where he's coming from, but she's got her list of demands, as she calls them. So it's a serious issue, both Alberta and Quebec. And I think one of the first things...
And I'm going to throw Saskatchewan in there, just FYI.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And he would have to reach out with serious commitments to them and talk about pipelines and talk about things that they have as priorities, as opposed to just say, I understand you. I grew up in Edmonton. That doesn't cut it.
No, that's not going to work.
No. And so, we'll see.
Yeah. Okay, Mark. I mean, this is the thought that would require a whole change of a 15-20-year approach on the part of Mr. Carney and the climate issue.
And so, I am not a historian by any stretch, but I do pay attention. And our history, particularly, 20th century and more recent history, reminds us that national unity in a Canadian context has been and continues to be our number one security challenge. And we think that right now we're in an enormously challenging environment, and we certainly are. And but national security is not a static concept. It evolves. It moves. And this is a real concern. And it's especially a real concern when you're sitting next to a predator who would quite happily not only, stoke the flames, so to speak, but would happily try to, manipulate the situation to their advantage. And let's not forget that there's other predators out there who are quite happy to watch these things. And oh, by the way, if anybody south of the border thinks that this is a good idea, that they're smoking an illegal product, because it just becomes a major distraction for them. Yeah. And this is why I go back to what I said about China earlier, that Washington actually thinks they're winning. They're not. It's the classic look at Johnny. My little Johnny's the only one in step. They actually think that they're winning at this game, and they're not. And that this would just be another massive strategic distraction, not just to Canada, but to the United States. And they're gonna get manipulated and outmaneuvered on the macro stage. Those are my concerns, and we're just stuck in the middle.
So Tasha, hope versus fear, both sides making the case on both sides.
Yeah. And again, it goes down to who you're talking to. This is a generational election, a class election, economic class election like we've never seen.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you all so much. Tasha Kheiriddin, a journalist and a lawyer and a columnist for Post Media. Margaret McCuaig-Johnston, a China expert. She is a senior fellow. This is the longest title in history, Margaret. Senior fellow at the Institute for Science, Society, and Policy at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa. We need some acronym to grasp that. And Mark Norman, senior defense strategist, 40 years in the military, vice chief of the defense staff of Canada, a man who has given and served. And so when he speaks, we listen, as we do to all of you. So everybody go and vote for whatever it is that's motivating you to do that. And we will all talk again very soon and do the post-game analysis, because we may be into the really serious discussion then, as opposed to the one in the context of the campaign. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And that's it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin. We'll see you again very soon.